We're in Canada. Nobody should be going without food or milk. I don't understand that. We're in Canada. We're not in a third world country. And the fact that we have kids, Aboriginal kids and non-Aboriginal kids, going to bed at night hungry is so wrong. There's no need of it.
The question of food security is an important one because, well, we all eat. We all like to eat. What is food security like for urban Aboriginal people? How do we find food security living within a city? How have urban Aboriginals adapted their traditional knowledge to a non-traditional landscape? I'm Salina Kemp. I was born and raised here in Halifax. I am Mi'kmaq from Millbrook First Nation. I am a parent, a student, and that's me. The experiences for Aboriginal people coming into the city is going to be different for each person. We are all individual. We come from different communities, different backgrounds, different traditional lands. There's going to be a different experience for somebody coming to the city from Millbrook as what there is for somebody coming to the city from Labrador. Most of the issues that urban Aboriginal people face are the same as the issues faced by every Canadian, with the addition of access to traditional foods, the ability to practice your culture and to engage with the landscape the way that our ancestors did, to learn how to respect nature, not just to be able to take food from nature, but to learn about it, to know when not to take food. This is the knowledge that everybody needs to get back. I'm terrible at this, so it's important to touch base with different knowledge holders.
We will see.
Dr. Bernie Francis has made a lifelong study of the Mi'kmaq language and its deeper meaning. So could you explain a little bit about what's contained within the term and the concept of Wigabulnamik?
Since I began interviewing our people across Nova Scotia, beginning around 1974, I began to realize that this Wigabulnamik is not just feast, but it's a forgiveness feast. Any other time would be eating, but this is a feast. You understand what I'm saying there?
Okay.
And when we have our gathering, for example, at least we used to have our gathering around New Year's Day. Our people would gather in a community hall, whatever that may be. It could be an old school, it could be an old house. And because the reserves were much smaller at that time, our population was much smaller. Our people would stand in a semicircle, and then the chief and his counselors would begin on the left side, and they would begin to exchange handshakes with the people that were standing in the semicircle, and then they would kind of like a cheek-to-cheek kind of greeting, and then they would ask for forgiveness to each and every single one. And then when the chief and counselors were finished on the left side, then of course the people themselves would begin to ask for forgiveness from one another. And that was the meaning of the Wigabulnamik. It's a forgiveness feast. Food is a little bit, it doesn't really say a whole heck of a lot to either an English-speaking person or a Mi'kmaq-speaking person. But when you say Mijipchewe is a little bit different in the Native community, because a Mijipch is an animal or a bird or something that you normally have for dinner. And it's always respected. For example, the way you may cut up fish or something. I've seen it one time where somebody would say to me, mo pepsidela mo mijip, do not have disrespect for this mijip or our food. And yes, it certainly means something to us. There's nowhere in the Mi'kmaq language that you can separate or take a word that would have no meaning. You wouldn't have any meaning as it pertains to food. It will always have some kind of meaning. Our people generally respected all animals. Not only did they respect them, but they also gave thanks each time that bounty was good. That's the difference. I think we knew our food didn't come from a grocery store, but it was given to us by the Creator, and then we made sure that we thanked the Creator as well as the animal spirit for making themselves available.
You look at Mi'kmaq place names, they're talking about fishing, they're talking about hunting, they're talking about gathering, they're talking portage routes, you look at them, they're mental maps. There's so much you can learn by looking at those names and examining those names. Resource areas, camping areas, you look at the word Tragically, for instance, which means basically encampment. And you see a lot of Tragicallys on river systems, places of encampment, places to fish eels, places to catch salmon, Sackville River, St. Margaret's Bay, Ingram River, the Lahave. You look at that and you understand how Mi'kmaq interpreted that landscape and how they saw that in their own mind. It's very intimate, and it's reflected in those names. As an archaeologist, when I look at pre-contact shell midden sites, one's amazed at the diet and the diversity of that diet and the foods that were available. They actually had very healthy lifestyle. Fish, aquatic food, avian, terrestrial, things such as caribou, rabbit. Things stayed quite the same when the French were here, the initial French contact. That was kind of a period of, for lack of a better word, accommodation, and there was more an economic relationship because of the fur trade. Mi'kmaq weren't displaced from a lot of these river systems. It was in the middle of that English-French conflict that we start to see some change. Then we see the British coming here. Now there's a demand for land, to make land available for settlers. It pushes Mi'kmaq somewhat, displaces them somewhat from the lands. When we see the establishment of Indian reserves as we know them today, there was a real significant drastic shift in that connection with land and the ability to use resources like they've done traditionally. The number one complaint throughout the colonial period was that the construction of mills and dams on rivers that impede the migration of fish up a river, the fact that the colonial government introduces now statutes that control fishing. There's regulations that have a bearing on obstructions that are in the river, such as a fish weir, that have been used for thousands of years by Mi'kmaq people. Hunting now is regulated. Instead of hunting for need as need be, they're now only allowed to hunt for the one moose or one caribou. So it has a real drastic effect on Mi'kmaq people. Indian Commissioner reports, they're talking about the destitution that's really hard to understand and fathom. Mi'kmaq people are really in a terrible state at that time. And people are starving. Grand councils and chiefs are, again, like I say, petition the colonial government, petition the father over and the king, who they call the father, the queen, who they call the mother. They're saying, okay, our people are starving, I have no ability to feed them. They're given small little allotments of seed, farm implements to farm on some of these acreage. Some of the lands are really not suitable for agriculture. The disconnect from those resources and from that land, and how negatively that impacted Mi'kmaq people here. When you talk about the resilience, then I'm just incredibly amazed how close these people, early people, our ancestors came to. The numbers were drastically reduced here in the province, and for them to have survived that is, I think, testimony to their resilience. There's a cultural memory, I think, and a connection to the land that never disappears. That connection to resources, that connection to that old cultural past is, like I say, inherent. It's embedded in the soul of these people.
I'm from the River Bar, and that's home. That's where my family is. Traditionally, whenever you hunt a moose, you share with the family. And traditionally, also fishing, your first catch, you share it. You don't keep it to yourself. Most of my family lives still on the reserve. My mom lives off reserve, but maintain a very close connection to my family, and very grateful and fortunate to have uncles that are, and aunts too, that fish and hunt and gather, our medicines, and are willing to teach us that. Eel River Bar was once renowned for clam beds, clam digging. It was really a community thing. Like, you knew that you could go down to the clam beds with your kids, and everybody would help each other out until they were, done their digging, and helping, watch the kids, kind of thing too. And then what happened, the town of Dalhousie wanted to put in a dam to provide extra water for the industries in the area, because it was a very industrial town, and so the Eel River was then dammed, and this caused irreparable damage to the clam beds. It changed the way of life, having the dam there. The water wasn't able to, flush out the toxins from the clam beds, so we couldn't dig the clams. They were deemed poisonous.
The urban population here in a place like Halifax, Dartmouth, don't understand that places like Bedford and Dartmouth were critical to the survival of Mi'kmaq people, and they were rich in resources here. And where we walk to a superstore today, this was Mi'kmaq people. And I think we tend to lose sight of that. It's so easy for us to go to a grocery store and get what we need, and we forget the landscape, which is kind of covered with concrete and buildings and stuff, was one time very important and very critical to early populations here in Nova Scotia.
It was historically a lot of fighting, and eventually everybody ended up being moved to these reservations. And then you end up having it so that you're not allowed to leave the reservation without a pass, unless you become an enfranchised Indian, in which case you can never go back to your community. So A lot of stuff like that, it led to the real disconnect between those that live urban and those that live within the community. And within the community, you only had access to so much food. The land was only so large. You weren't allowed to leave without permission, so you learn to depend on others, and what is brought in is rations. A lot of people did end up moving to cities. That's how my family ended up within the city. Is my great-grandmother moved to the city so that she could find work because she needed to be able to feed her children. Food has been used as a weapon in a lot of cases. Residential schools, there was a lot of violence that was connected to food. Food has been a major theme throughout all of our history.
Had a choice between raising my kids in the city, in the ghetto, and amongst poor and people that had no hope, or I could bring them back here and teach them a different way of life. That the things that they needed were at their fingertips if they would just reach out and take them. Yeah, well, there was a few up there on that higher ridge there.
Yeah.
It's just that it's so clear back here they can survive it. It was hard.
Yeah, well, that's the thing.
You don't have everything that you need. There's only so much to go. That little bit has to go this far. And there's no way of getting it. Food banks won't help you. They will, but you're not actually going to even get a full meal out of it. If you get spaghetti, you'll have no sauce, and you may have tea and coffee, but you have no milk. This was our grocery store. We got our fish from here. We got our berries from here. We'd snare partridge and rabbit. We used the resources that were here and made the best of everything that we had. It made the difference between me feeding my kids and them going hungry. It's a very special place. This is really where my kids grew up. We lived in a house. We had power and running water, but we spent all of our time right here. This is where they ate breakfast a lot of days, where they ate their lunch, where they had supper. They went to bed right over there. Have hot dogs over the fire. This place has all of our memories tied to it. Good times and bad. We're as much a part of this as that city out there. The only way I could do that was to bring them back here and let them live that, and let them have that free existence where they could just be themselves. No pressure. A tree isn't going to make fun of you for what you're wearing. That bush over there isn't going to expect things from you. They got an opportunity to live in harmony with nature, where they were safe.
The part I remember most about this area is being with my family. It was a place to escape the city. It was a place where I wasn't poor. I wasn't trying to be popular. I wasn't any of those things. I was. I was free to still act like a little kid with my little brother and sister and run through the woods and play imaginary, and I was able to learn so much back here that continued on with me for the rest of my life.
not something that most kids get a chance to have. And it's right at their doorstep. But they don't know it's here, they don't know how to use it, they don't know what's available to them here that will keep you alive, will keep you going, will make you healthy. You have to have another resource or you will suffer.
I had a few kids at school that would make comments about how, I'd show up and I'd smell like smoke and I'd have, tree branch stuck in my hair and sap on my hands, and really I didn't care. My closest friends, actually, I brought them back here. So many things about respecting myself, respecting others, respecting nature, and not taking more than I need. And if I have more than I need, then I should share that with others.
We stepped out of the system. We removed ourselves from it and came here. It's all political. It comes down to the policies that we follow. Sometimes paying rent is a choice between buying food. That's political. We don't look outside of those policies. We don't have any way of navigating outside of the system that's been created to keep us contained.
Growing up back here, I was always fishing and gathering food, so when the Donald Marshall Jr. case was something that I became aware of, it was a shock to me that somebody was charged for something that I had done my entire life, something that I had always believed was my inherent right to be able to provide myself and my family with food. After being back here, when you go through the city and you see homeless people and people that are starving, it makes you ache on the inside, because these people don't know how to go out and get food. They don't know that their food doesn't have to come from a food bank. Their food is all around them. Their food is anywhere that they can find a green space.
Poor doesn't necessarily have to mean going without. It just means no money.
When you're talking about the urban Aboriginal community, there's a combination of people. There are Mi'kmaq people here. There's First Nations from right across Canada. We have Inuit, Métis, we have status, non-status. So there's a huge range of Aboriginal people that are residing in HRM. That population is actually has doubled in the last little bit, and I suspect that it will continue to double, and will continue to grow. There are many ways that the Friendship Center in particular offers food security. One is the food bank. Daily they stop in and they provide food, and sometimes it's tea and coffee, whatever's on the truck for that day. So community members come in on a regular basis every day and pick up that. We also offer such things as food security courses.
What about food security? One of the main things that impacts a lot of youth, when you go back to school, you have to learn how to all of a sudden do your own budget, prepare your own meals, and a lot of times there's not a lot of money to do that with. So for that reason, we're going to go out today. There's going to be $20. With this $20, we are going through the grocery store. You guys are going to find affordable but yet healthy food. Once we have managed to find the food, we're going to come back here. We're going to prepare the food.
you to have one serving with taco, you need about this much. Mine is just meat.
There's so many choices and things to think about when buying food.
Times what? 7 of us? So the size of your brain. So probably about this one's 721. That's not too bad. That should be just about right, do you think? And that's the cheapest. For meats.
We think about whether it was ethically produced, fairly traded, where it was grown, and even how far it has had to travel. Whether or not there's a local alternative, whether it is actually healthy for us, and if it's been genetically modified.
Supporting local businesses. Stimulating our economy.
So why would buying local be important to you guys? What are some of the things that come along with buying local? Anything?
Fresh food.
It is a bit fresher.
And doesn't travel in a truck forever.
There's a little bit easier on the environment.
Yeah, there's no crazy chemicals in the food that you're eating.
we know what's in it.
You know what's in there.
Yeah. The main thing that we have to think about over all of this, however, is whether or not we can afford the food.
Please select your method of payment and touch the screen where indicated.
Give me a
Credit straight.
When we look at the rate of obesity and heart disease within the First Nations community and Aboriginal community in general, it's so much higher. And people are entitled to have a healthy lunch, supper, dinner, breakfast. Those are really key.
How do we strain that?
It's having a balanced meal to make sure people are actually getting what their body needs. And that is, I do believe, going back to traditional ways of eating, harvesting, and buying local. All of those things are really key in moving all communities forward, not just our First Nations and our Aboriginal community, but all communities.
Occasionally, you might have dinner with your elders. When you're with your elders, you should respect your elders. You cannot do that while staring at your screen.
God, I don't even know what a phone is when I sit with the elders.
See? We should treat each other the same way. We should respect each other the same way that we respect our elders.
We're so far from our traditional way of eating. So fish and moose and deer, eel, all those things that were so traditional for us, we're so far removed from that. We've done a moose harvest hunt this year, and that was the first time we did that. We're looking to make sure that that continues to grow. You're teaching people the proper way to harvest, you're respecting the environment, and you're learning about your own history. You're learning about the cultural pieces that make you whole. And when you're doing that, while food security is the biggest piece, there's that piece of knowing who you are and where you come from, what's important, and I think it helps even mentally. When you respect the environment, you begin to respect yourself. You begin to see who and what you are and what you're responsible for. Aboriginal people are traditionally responsible for our environment. And I think sometimes we've been so removed from that, and I think it's really important that we get back to that. We try to do community feasts here. We do, Christmas cheer to make sure people have access to food and that during Christmas.
Kjipuktuk, now the sultiega, get a big yadi.
We have people that are out on the streets passing out sandwiches to homeless. All of that helps someone, and those barriers are sometimes so large for community members that they're going without, and that saddens me. We know that we have a lot of mental health issues, and much of that comes, it's from residential schools, it's from the Indian Act, it's generational effects that have happened. But the moment you start to incorporate those cultural pieces around food security, education, childcare, it just brings you back to knowing who and what you are and where you need to be. That traditional knowledge is key. I think everybody can learn from that stuff.
Our drum group, much like our community, is made up of many different nations. We have people who are Mi'kmaq, Passamaquoddy, Inuit, as well as other nations who come and visit. During our breaks, we'd find ourselves talking about things such as traditional medicines, foods, and ceremonies.
To walk to the beat of your own drum.
So, is this group important for you guys for food security? Is it a connection that you guys have been able to rely on each other?
What we've done is we've made our community around our drum. And what takes place with us when we have feasts or sharing or whatever, somebody within our circle will find what we need. Like Donna Gavan's uncle from northern New Brunswick, when he finds out that we're having a gathering and a feast, he'll always send down some salmon or some moose meat, or Donna's dad will send down deer meat. And we always celebrate those things.
It takes me to my father and my grandmother when he was growing up. They grew up fishing, hunting, and my grandmother collected cranberries and wild blueberries. All of their food was just what nature provided. That was it. And that's how my father grew up.
When I lived in my community, we did not eat food from the ground. We mostly ate food that came from the grocery store. We didn't plant our foods. We mostly got that from the grocery store, and I didn't think that was healthy. But since I've moved to Halifax, all I've been eating is organic food. And it's a big difference with my body, how my body feels. I'm a lot more healthier now.
We have Kim here, who runs an organic farm, so food often comes up in our conversation, beforehand or after breaks, or we're asking Kim, or somebody will bring us treats, and we try to make sure that they're more on the nutritional side rather than the junk food side, or what we know is junk food side.
Yeah. This circle brings up often the honoring of the land and the water. And so this circle has come to the farm and helped bless the farm and the land. And I think anytime that we come together, we do the water song, and we're blessing the water with prayers, which is essential to food security. We need clean water to have good food. So the spirit of this drum and the people around it bring prayers for the land and for the water, which in essence affects our food and our ability to have good food.
Community is the basis of where we could start creating food security for ourselves by taking responsibility by starting to teach ourselves how to grow more of our own food, and then again bringing more people together and sharing that food when it comes to harvest.
Being a part of this group of strong women and getting together on a spiritual level, we often think of each other in our lives, and that could come through bringing extra food that you have or bringing extra medicines that you have, and just sharing with each other.
We're starting to get different generations.
Yes.
And how important it is for us to be good mentors to these girls, and how important it is for them to have a voice with us, that they feel safe enough to speak to us and laugh with us and be with us, because that's
Ask
all
questions,
part of,
right? Yeah.
And so we can learn from each other, and your guys are our next generation, and if we don't treat you properly, then we're not doing you a service. So that's part of the passing on of food, is passing on the ability for them to feel safe and be able to ask and learn.
When you gather, when the female energy that gathers together here, it's food for the soul, or food for the spirit. That's what happens here. That there's a sustaining of the soul being fed, or the spirit being fed, and how that transcends into a larger, greater good.
Food is anything that we ingest, whether it's for the spirit, or whether it's for our physical body, or whether it's for our emotional body. And just drumming is in a way food, because drumming puts us in a nice space. And even if we're in a better space when we eat physical food, we're going to be digesting and absorbing it in a much better way.
I think the ability to use traditional knowledge in a non-traditional type of setting or environment, it's possible, it's doable. And I think it's within all of us to do that. We're humans, we live in the landscape, we have this connection with environment, this relationship with the environment that's reciprocal. I think people today are starting to realize that connection, and we're recognizing how disconnected we have become from the environment, the ability for this, for these rivers, these lakes, the lands to provide for us. You just see that now, and it's shift in different outlooks to production and stuff, agriculture, and fish now. People, there's that I think that pull back to more traditional kind of relationships with environment. And we're reconnecting again. You see that in farmers markets downtown today. And you see that in some of the little community gardens around the city. There's a reawakening to that relationship taking place now, and it's like a mini little food revolution.
If you don't do good because of the lack of food,
it's really good though.
From where it started,
Not all members of the urban community live within the urban setting, such as my friend Kim and her partner Dominic, who are farmers who produce food by traditional ways of respect for the land and the animals.
The reality is, you live in an urban environment, you're never going to be able to grow enough that you need for your full year. And so we need people in the rural environments to be growing food. Now people need to ask themselves, how do I want my food grown? By who? Where is it coming from? What are their practices? Do I, and I get, at the end of the day, yeah, it means a lot to save a couple of bucks here and a couple of bucks there and a couple of bucks there. But at what cost? Because if we have no rural food movement happening here and it's all coming from California or elsewhere or China or who knows where, then what do we have? Now the whole issue of food, living on a farm, producing food, has become a huge part of my life. But more the social justice aspect of it is a part of my heart. It's great. I mean, honestly, if we weren't growing our own food, we couldn't afford it. Like, I recognize that. And yet I also recognize that we can't afford to subsidize it for people either. Because making a living farming is a huge issue. I mean, when we talk about food security, the fact that most farmers can't afford to farm and actually go under because they can't make a living doing it is a barrier. Then I started to really think about food justice in terms of social justice.
Yeah.
Of who has food, and the good food. Who's it accessible to? And really started to see that, well, it's the people who have the money to pay for good food that have food. And otherwise, you go to the food bank and everything's tins. And very rarely do you get fresh vegetables. Small, sustainable, earth-loving practices, they're not valued in the same way. Getting rained on. The labor is intensive. So I'm really concerned about the future of farming in terms of food security.
Like this one?
Beautiful. And that for me is culturally significant. Like the way that we farm is important to me because it's about the land, and the land is not mine. And it needs to be here and in good shape for as long as we can possibly manage, which hopefully is forever. Hi guys and gals. That interrelatedness is really important, and I think a lot of people, when you talk about food security, and in an urban setting, a lot of folks have lost that connection, that full circle of like, yeah, food had a face, or the labor that goes into harvesting it. But in agriculture, that's not happening. To me, that's really important, that respect for life. Because that, if you are what you eat, then we ought to be respecting what we're eating, to show respect to ourselves, to the land around us, to everything. It is that to all our relations, right?
Do you think it would be possible for us to have a feast of forgiveness?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, we can restore it. We can restore that forgiveness feast easily enough. It's only a matter of using our imaginations. I think that we definitely need to talk to the elders a little bit more. I mean, who goes out of their way nowadays to talk to the elders? I mean, we're too busy with the modern technology, with our texting and our our emailing, that we don't go out of our way to speak to an elder about any particular topic to do with Mi'kmaq culture. I know many of them that are still around, that were raised by elders and their grandparents. They know a lot of stuff. It's a matter of our young people and not so young people to go and visit them and ask. I just hope that we can bring this back, and perhaps in a different way, but it certainly can be done.
Erugeru enagerua, erugeru enagerua, erugeru enagerua, erugeru enagerua, erugeru enagerua, Herugeru Henagerua 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 Daho